My name is David. I worked as a gravedigger for 2 decades at Oakwood Cemetery in Chicago. During that time, I witnessed many unusual occurrences, but nothing could compare to what transpired a few months ago. It was an ordinary day at work, and I was following my regular routine: digging, caring for headstones, and making necessary repairs. That morning, I received a work order to prepare a new grave. I started digging as I usually did, enjoying the stillness and serenity of the cemetery, which many consider dreary, but has always been a sanctuary for me. After several hours of digging, my shovel struck something hard. Initially, I thought it was a rock, which was not uncommon, but as I continued, I realized it was something much stranger. I cleared the dirt away, and what I discovered sent a chill down my spine. An old wedding dress buried with a skeleton. The dress was soiled, tattered, and faded with time. The remains were in a poor state, almost crumbling with touch. Who would bury a bride in such a shallow grave without any identification? The entire situation made no sense. The cemetery has strict regulations regarding burials, and this clearly didn't adhere to any of them. A shiver ran down my spine. I'm not easily frightened, but finding that body left me feeling unsettled. I glanced around, but I was alone. The silence of the cemetery felt heavier, as if the entire place was observing me. I couldn't just disregard it. I went to the cemetery office to report my discovery. My supervisor, Thomas, listened carefully and appeared concerned. After a brief discussion, he gave me instructions that I found rather odd. He told me to rebury the body in a different location far from where I found it. I questioned whether that was the proper procedure because in all my years, I had never encountered anything like this. Thomas simply stated those were the orders and that I should comply. There was something in his tone that made me uneasy, but I complied. I returned to the site feeling heavy-hearted. I reburied the body as respectfully as I could in a more secluded area of the cemetery where few people go. Throughout the process, the image of the wedding dress and the skeletal remains lingered in my mind. In the following days, life at the cemetery resumed its usual rhythm, or at least I thought so. I carried on with my daily tasks, trying to shake off the unease brought on by the discovery of the buried bride. However, it wasn't long before odd things began to happen. It was a Thursday night, well past closing time. I was finishing up by locking the main gate when I noticed a pale figure among the headstones. At first, I assumed it was a visitor who hadn't left in time. I grabbed my flashlight and approached to remind them that the cemetery was closing. As I got closer, the figure became clearer. It was a woman in a dirty and tattered wedding dress, strikingly similar to the one I had unearthed. My blood ran cold. She faced away from me, her shoulders shaking as if she were sobbing. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. When I was just a few meters away, she stopped crying and turned slowly. What I saw was a horrifying sight. Her face was pale and distorted, with deep, sorrowful eyes. Before I could react, she vanished, as if she had evaporated into thin air. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I had just witnessed. I went home rattled and struggled to sleep. The following morning, I arrived at work and told Thomas about my experience. He looked at me seriously and advised me to dismiss it, claiming it was merely a figment of my imagination due to my recent discovery. I tried to take his advice, but the apparitions continued in the days that followed. Each night, I would see the bride weeping in various parts of the cemetery. Sometimes, I could hear her crying even when she was nowhere to be seen. The ordeal was unsettling, instilling a fear of working at night. I began searching for details about the cemetery and any stories of brides interred there, but found nothing in the official records. I opted to speak with the elderly gravekeepers, yet they all seemed hesitant to share. One of them, a man named Harold, discreetly advised me to drop the matter, warning that odd occurrences had always been associated with that place and it would be best to leave it be. As days transformed into weeks, the haunting presence of the spectral bride intensified. I tried every avenue to uncover her identity, going through old documents, inquiring with longtime residents, and hunting for local lore that might hold a clue, but came up empty. It felt as if she had never been recorded in history. Each day turned into a fresh torment. The bride's figure appeared more often, perpetually weeping, always gazing at me with those hollow, sorrowful eyes. I could hear her cries resonating among the tombstones, a sensation of her watching me even when I couldn't see her directly. The atmosphere of the cemetery, once familiar and even comforting, had morphed into an unending nightmare. I confided in my partner about what was happening, but she dismissed it as mere fatigue and imagination. Close friends echoed her sentiments, suggesting it was simply stress from years of work piling up, but I was certain it was real. With each passing night, my grip on sanity slipped a little more. In a final attempt to find answers, I returned to Harold and another gravedigger named Simon. I laid out my predicament, pleading for any insight or advice, but all I got were sympathetic glances and counsel to just forget about it. Eric, a friend who had always stood by me, recommended taking some time off, but I knew that wouldn't resolve the real issue. Working at the cemetery had grown unbearable. The bride's presence wouldn't allow me any peace. With the days slipping by, I felt my mental state deteriorate until I finally hit a breaking point. I could no longer sleep, couldn't eat properly, and my job at the cemetery had become a form of psychological torture. That's when I made the hardest choice of my life. I quit. I simply couldn't bear to stay in that place any longer. Surrounded by memories and visions that relentlessly haunted me, I communicated my decision to my boss, who, though taken aback, accepted my resignation without much question. On my final day, I visited the spot where I had found the wedding dress. I lingered there for a few moments in silence, almost as if bidding farewell to the ghostly bride. I don't know if it was just my imagination, but I felt a chilling sensation enveloping me, as though she were watching me one last time. As I exited the cemetery, a blend of relief and sorrow washed over me. I had spent 2 decades of my life there, yet I knew I couldn't go on. The scars from this experience linger, and even now, I sometimes hear that distant sound of weeping that sends chills down my spine. In 1985, I took a job as a gravedigger at a cemetery that the city decided to shut down. They planned to open a new cemetery, but they didn't hire anyone from the old one, and I found myself out of work instantly. Since being a gravedigger was the only skill I excelled at, I went in search of a job in the nearby town. By chance, I discovered that their cemetery was looking for a new gravedigger because the previous one had resigned, though no one explained the reason. It struck me as odd, but time was of the essence. I needed to provide for my family. I walked into the cemetery administrator's office, and after a short discussion about my background, they hired me immediately. They offered me accommodation in a remote area of the cemetery since I was coming from elsewhere. I accepted right away. I needed the income. The position required me to work the night shift, which was the only option available. While I preferred daytime work, I was willing to accept any job that allowed me to support my family. The small house they offered was basic but comfortable enough. The hardest part was being so far from my wife, Emily, and our 2 children. I stipulated that I needed 2 consecutive days off per week to spend time with my family. My boss agreed, so I could return home during the weekends, even if Emily wasn't too enthusiastic about the arrangement. I assured her that I'd seek a position at the new cemetery in our town of Riverton as soon as one opened. My new routine began almost immediately. From Monday to Friday, I worked from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. The nights were quiet, involving simply some patrols and maintenance of the graves. On weekends, I returned home to spend time with Emily and the kids. Living in the cemetery had its perks and downsides. The main advantage was the lack of a commute. I didn't need to waste gas or time traveling to work. However, the solitude was challenging, which I gradually learned to manage. In my first week, I quickly noticed that working nights at the cemetery felt different from my previous experience at the old one. I had always worked during the daytime and was unfamiliar with the eerie sensation of being alone in such a vast place filled with history. The gravestones and tombs seemed to breathe at night, casting shadows that danced in the wind and producing sounds I couldn't identify. Getting acquainted with the team was a gradual process. There was a caretaker, a security guard, and the administrator, all of whom were welcoming but seemed to share a secret. The security guard, Mr. Harris, the oldest of the group, often recounted strange tales about the cemetery. He mentioned that peculiar things had occurred there, but he always left out the details. During my first week, my duties were straightforward. Patrol the cemetery, make sure everything was in order, check for any intruders, and maintain the graves. The nights were long and silent, yet I adhered strictly to my routine, remaining vigilant for anything unusual. On that first night, I quickly realized that loneliness was a constant companion. The silence was only disturbed by the natural sounds of the cemetery, the rustling leaves, the distant call of night birds, or the sporadic barking of a dog. These ambient noises, which would have been mundane during the day, took on a sinister quality in the dead of night. The house where I resided was plain but cozy, with a small garden in front that provided some privacy, being stationed away from the main cemetery area. My initial struggle to sleep during the day was soon remedied as I adapted to the routine. Although it was exhausting, I was determined to do my job well. As weeks passed, I began to notice some strange occurrences. One night, while making my rounds, I discovered a grave that was partially open. I went to investigate, assuming it might be vandalism, but there were no signs of forced entry. It felt peculiar, as if the lid had been removed and carefully replaced. On another occasion, I heard whispers emanating from an old section of the cemetery. I approached, only to find nothing out of the ordinary. These oddities left me feeling uneasy, but I tried to remain composed and focus on my work. One especially dark night, while I was on my rounds, I felt an overpowering chill, as though someone was watching me. I scanned the area but found no one. Despite pressing on with my duties, the impression lingered. I decided to hasten my rounds and return to the cemetery headquarters. These lonely nights made me question the wisdom of accepting the night shift. What once seemed like a tranquil setting began to take on a more ominous atmosphere. Nonetheless, I knew I needed the job and was resolved not to let these peculiarities sway me. Over time, I grew more accustomed to the cemetery routine and recognized that despite its unsettling aspects, it was a place deserving of respect and care. I maintained the graves diligently, ensured the headstones were in good repair, and kept everything tidy. I took great care in keeping the graves tidy and in good condition, making necessary repairs to the headstones, and most importantly, ensuring the cemetery remained peaceful and orderly during the nights. However, everything changed during my third week on the job. It was just another night on my rounds when I spotted a young girl, seemingly around 13, wandering through the cemetery. I was both surprised and concerned because the cemetery was closed at night and no one was supposed to be there. I approached the girl, who looked frightened and claimed she was visiting a grave. While it struck me as odd, I didn't want to frighten her any further. I asked her to follow me and brought her to the cemetery office, asking her to wait on a bench outside while I called the authorities. But when I returned, she had vanished. The police arrived within 5 minutes. I explained everything, but they began searching the grounds and found nothing. They suggested I might have been exhausted and hallucinating, which left me with a lingering doubt. I was certain I had seen her. It didn't feel like a figment of my imagination. The girl appeared so real and so scared. After the police left, I started to second-guess myself. Was I really losing my mind? In the days that followed, I tried to stick to my routine. But a week later, the girl reappeared, looking just as frightened as before. This time, I decided against calling the police without first understanding the situation. I asked her what she was doing there, and once again she mentioned visiting a grave. I took a different approach and asked her the name of the person she wanted to see. She gave me a name I didn't recognize. Back at the office, I checked the records, but there was no one with that name. When I returned to talk to her again, she was gone. This ongoing mystery began to invade my thoughts. Who was this girl, and why did she keep appearing only to vanish again? A few days later, while on my rounds, I found her once more. This time, I chose not to ask direct questions and simply followed her as she walked through the cemetery. She seemed to know exactly where she was headed, and my concern and curiosity were overwhelming. As we walked, I tried to engage her in conversation. I asked her name, and with a distant expression, she said her name was the same as the grave she sought. That sent chills down my spine. I continued to walk beside her and asked about her parents. She replied that she didn't know where they were and hadn't seen them in a long time. The sadness in her voice was palpable. As we remained silent for a while, my curiosity and discomfort grew. Eventually, we arrived at an old, nearly forgotten tomb tucked away among the newer graves. The girl stopped, looked at me, and calmly stated that she was afraid of knives. My heart raced. I always carried a knife during my shifts for protection against potential intruders or wild animals. Somehow, she seemed to be aware of this, which intrigued me even more. Before I could inquire about her fear of knives, she spoke again in a soft yet sorrowful tone, revealing that she had been stabbed to death and was buried right where we stood. A chill ran down my spine. Her voice was so real, so filled with anguish. I was momentarily frozen, trying to comprehend her words. But when I looked back, the girl had disappeared. The surroundings felt colder and darker. My heart was pounding as I experienced a mix of fear and sadness. I ran back to my cabin in the cemetery and locked the door, spending the rest of the night awake, pondering the girl's story. When morning arrived, I went to speak with my supervisor and shared my experience without going into great detail to avoid sounding insane. I requested to switch to the day shift and to no longer live on the cemetery grounds. To my surprise, he accepted my request without many questions, making me suspicious that he might know more than he let on. Despite the longer commute of over an hour and a half each day, I felt it was the best choice. I preferred the exhaustion of the drive to the eerie feelings the cemetery gave me at night. Once I transitioned to day shifts, the routine became easier. However, every time I passed by the girl's grave, a chill would run through me, as if her story was still unfinished. A few months later, a friend approached me with a job opportunity for a project he was starting. Without hesitation, I accepted, as the work would be closer to home, allowing me to enjoy my family without worrying about the dead any longer. My name is Tom, and I work as the gravekeeper at a secluded cemetery in the hills of Virginia. This job has always felt serene. The cemetery is remote, enveloped by dense woods and stillness. Most of the burials are for people who have lived here for years, and I know nearly everyone. It all started a few months back. I was finishing up a burial late one afternoon when I sensed that someone was watching me. I looked up and spotted two bright lights deep within the forest. At first, I thought they might belong to an animal, perhaps a fox or a stray dog. However, those lights seemed fixed on me, as if they were examining me. I tried to brush it off and went back to work, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Weeks passed, and the lights made their appearance several times, always at night. They seemed to be in different positions, almost as if they were trailing me. I figured I was becoming paranoid. Initially, the lights would appear at the edge of the cemetery near the trees, standing out against the darkness and glowing with an unusual brilliance. Whenever I glanced in their direction, the lights remained still, locked onto me, as if anticipating something. It felt like they drew a little nearer with each passing night. Sometimes, while I was checking the grounds, I would spot them peeking between the tombstones, gleaming with a chilly, piercing light. A shiver would run through me each time I saw them, as if a rush of cold air swept over me. It was a bizarre feeling, a combination of being watched and judged. I confided in some coworkers and even my partner, but they all chuckled, insisting it must be my imagination or possibly a nocturnal creature. This only frustrated me more, as I was sure something peculiar was afoot. One night, the lights showed up close to the cemetery office, where I kept my records and tools. They were now nearer than ever, almost at the threshold of the light from the lamp that lit the entrance. My heart raced, and my hand shook as I gripped my flashlight. When I shone it toward the lights, they vanished into the shadows. Still, my unease multiplied. During the daytime, I searched for any footprints or signs of wildlife where I had seen those lights but found nothing. No tracks or indications. It felt as if those lights sprang from nowhere only to retreat back into nothingness. Each night, the sensation of being observed grew more suffocating. I was convinced these weren't the eyes of ordinary animals. There was something disturbingly human about them. Sleep eluded me. I always felt as though I was being watched, even in my own home. On subsequent nights, I became increasingly vigilant during my patrols. I brought a more powerful flashlight and, for safety, a knife. The cemetery had no security, and I needed to feel shielded. When the lights appeared, I would point the beam their way, but beyond the glow, I saw nothing, only darkness. The lights began to appear more often, seemingly everywhere, always monitoring my every move. It was as if they surrounded me, slowly closing in. While making my rounds, I sensed unseen gazes upon me, even when they were out of sight. It felt as though they lingered in the shadows, poised to emerge at the perfect moment. My anxiety was heightened, and any sound during the night would cause me to flinch. One evening, as I strolled among the gravestones, I caught sight of the eyes again. However, this time they appeared different, closer and with an intensity as if they had a message for me. I directed my flashlight toward them, but as usual, they vanished into the gloom. In the third week of their appearances, an unsettling event occurred. It was a particularly dark and quiet night, typical for the isolated cemetery where I was employed. During my patrol, I observed the glowing eyes once more, now seemingly nearer. They appeared to be positioned near an old, nearly forgotten grave. With my heart pounding and the flashlight steady in one hand, my knife grasped in the other, I moved closer to the location. The shadows around me seemed to shift in an unusual manner, and I sensed that something was about to be revealed. Suddenly, the shadows began to form a shape, morphing into a vague mass of darkness accompanied by those bright eyes I had encountered numerous times before. Before I could react or comprehend what was unfolding, the shadows lunged toward me. The sensation was as if visible claws were attacking me. I fought with all my strength. The claws were sharp and fast, and I felt as if they were tearing at my skin, leaving deep and painful marks. The pain was intense, and the attack seemed endless. The shadows eventually withdrew and vanished into the night, but I was hurt and tired beyond belief. I made it to the cemetery office, but it was a struggle. I called the hospital right away and did the best I could to treat the wounds. The pain and fear were nearly intolerable on the way there. In addition to treating my wounds, they gave me vaccinations to guard against animal-transmitted illnesses. I was deeply scarred by the experience, both mentally and physically. The animal that had attacked me was not a simple one. I kept having nightmares about the bright eyes and the shadows. I don't know what attacked me, but I also don't want to know. I quit my job at the cemetery as soon as I could, and a few months later I found another job. However, I will always remember that evening.